1 month ago, I took a look back at the original Turok Dinosaur Hunter on DF Retro. I explored the world of Turok on Nintendo 64 and discussed its new conversions. Well, Turok 2 is now out on Nintendo Switch, and I thought that would be a perfect time to sit down and discuss the game. And as with the Turok 1 video, I had to bring in the one and only Alex Battaglia. Alex.
I'm doing incredible, John. You don't even have to ask. I mean, I'm talking about Turok. There's nothing better.
Yes. So for this video, with Gamescom coming up, it's like I don't have time to do the full DF Retro treatment, which this will probably still get in the future. But for now, I just wanted to sit down and talk about Turok 2 with you, because I think for both of us, this is one of those games that has become weirdly important over the years. It's very flawed, don't get me wrong, and I think we both agree on that, but it's a very interesting game, and in its revised version, thanks to Night Dive Studios, it is a significantly better game.
Yeah.
So let's start at the beginning. Turok 2 was obviously created in response to Turok Dinosaur Hunter, which was a huge success on Nintendo 64, perhaps owing to the scant library, and even though it kind of has a bad reputation now, as I said in that original video, I still think it's a brilliant game and it holds up well. But for the sequel, they kind of went in a different direction, and it's a more story-focused, almost more aimless kind of game that maybe goes too far in some areas.
Yeah, you can see that in the initial kind of opening of the game. Turok 1 has some text and, like a fly-through over the hub world, and then you're just dropped right in.
Yep.
In Turok 2, there's a story set up with this strange blue alien woman talking to you and describing about what your mission is as a Turok.
Greetings, Turok.
Greetings, Turok.
Greetings, Turok.
Believe me, I had many very rude names for this woman as I was younger. But it has just a different feel. I think it's kind of like Turok before it, which was heavily influenced by Quake. I think even by the release of Seeds of Evil, the influence from other games was starting to seep in that had come out, other first-person shooters, or almost a kind of System Shock kind of influence, I'd say, with terms of there's a narrative now, there's a real narrative, and it kind of gets in the way in the beginning, and it changes the entire way the game is done. Instead of just collecting keys now, you're kind of doing various mission objectives, which usually involves saving something, usually children or soldiers.
Yeah, Turok, he spends a lot of time looking for young children in this game, which is a little bit strange.
Thank you, Turok.
Thank you, Turok.
And, but there's a lot of other differences in the core game design. Turok, I'd say, is not as fast now in Turok 2, but instead your arsenal has increased greatly. It's huge now.
Yeah.
There's so many unique weaponry that we'll talk about. But, the enemies reacted pretty differently. There's a greater, variety of enemies now with intense death animations, which you'll probably be seeing on screen right now.
Yeah, and that's actually, that's one of the technical features, is they did add an actual skeletal system to this game, which was kind of a new thing back then. Half-Life had that as well at the time, but that's what enables things like the way they react to each shot. They sort of flinch and move backward, and you really get an extra sense of impact on every shot in the game, and that's really important, I think, to the feel, especially with weapons like the shotgun, which honestly it's one of the first weapons you get, but man, feels good. It's a good shotgun.
With location-specific damage, the first game did play off animations where it looked like characters would be hit in the neck or something like that.
Oh yeah.
But this time it is actually based upon location, so you can headshot things for, at least in the remastered version, which on PC, which I've played, spews out tons of gore and viscera when you shoot something, and it's very satisfying. But I remember actually very specifically from the original version of the game on N64 that getting kind of satisfying headshots was really, really hard, due to the frame rate and I think honestly hitboxes at that time.
there's definitely two things, well, multiple things going on. So yes, the frame rate is one of the most significant problems with the Nintendo 64 version, but also the FOV is super, super limited, and the hitboxes are a little bit, I guess you could say, too narrow or a little bit strange. It's very hard to pull off those types of shots, I feel, and it's still today.
Yeah.
So I guess one thing, when this first hit, this game released on Nintendo 64 first. And I think that's where I think we both played it there first, but I didn't spend a lot of time with the N64 version back in the day. But, it's obviously notorious for its abysmal performance.
You could call it performing. I mean, there's a word for it somewhere, but I just remember even back then when I was younger, just noticing the difference when I would look at the ground versus when I would look at the scenery. And I didn't, at the time, I couldn't conceptualize it necessarily so well.
The thing that always got me about this, even back in the day, I did look through the manual. The original Turok, in the manual, very specifically says our goal was to make a 30 frames per second shooter on Nintendo 64. That's
amazing.
A tall order. They mostly got there with Turok 1. And then Turok 2 comes along, and my goodness, it's choppy. And that absolutely, I feel, makes the game pretty much unplayable today on a modern N64. It's too slow. It's really choppy.
And, if you combine that with, there's fog in the game as well, too. We'll talk about that in a minute, but it was pushed out a little bit more. But when you combine it with the fog, the low frame rate, and the generally narrow FOV, it's not very playable, unlike the PC version of the time, though, which I'd argue is much more playable.
Although both of them have one flaw, and that's really, I think the map design is just too convoluted for its own good, especially later in the game. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, my distinct memory is playing the game, not beating it, getting to the Lair of the Blind Ones, and there's a section where you're underwater in some underwater caves, and you just got access to a new weapon that allows you to breathe underwater, basically, for extended periods of time. And unlike other games which have kind of, I would say, larger map design that, is sprawling and you have to go back and forth, backtracking, getting key cards and such, there's no landmark design in a lot of Turok 2's levels. So there's sections that have kind of Halo the Library-esque, everything looks the same, but you can't tell where you're going. And I just got lost in the original Turok 2.
This is true. Yeah. And I think we both love complex map designs.
Yeah, definitely.
But the problem here is that there's just not enough signposting. It really is just all these featureless hallways that all kind of run together. And the original Turok has some repetition in its visual design due to the way it was built, but I do feel like overall most of its areas are fairly recognizable. You kind of get a sense of where you're at in each level, and it's obvious when you're running back in a place you've been, whereas in Turok 2 really truly you can get lost in some of these levels. Like
there's so many dead end areas, and also the fact that they did, like Turok, before it, Turok Dinosaur Hunter, try and create a non-linear design with the hub, where you have to go back to previous levels to get a new item to unlock the last level. That's basically it. Kind of like the last game, but the problem is they locked these behind weird power-ups that work by standing on pads in the game, located throughout the entire game. But they're not like Metroid-like, where these things that you get on certain levels and have to backtrack through that are useful in normal gameplay. No, these things only exist to gatekeep you from going to advancing. There's no fun in actually using them.
Yeah, and honestly though, I think at its core that idea is interesting.
Yeah.
I like what they were trying to do there. And obviously, a lot of the people on the development team would go on to work on Metroid Prime, as we stated before.
Yeah.
But this isn't quite there. But then there's the PC version, which I do think makes the game a lot more fun and a lot more playable.
Yeah.
Comparatively, because the level design is still confusing, but just having a higher frame rate, smoother performance, and a higher resolution does make it a lot easier to play. And here we're looking at footage of the game running on a vintage PC running on a 3DFX Voodoo 1 card.
Oh, yeah.
So this is how the game would have looked at the time. This is using the game's native support for Glide, which is 3DFX's sort of proprietary API that was very popular back then, although it does still support Direct3D, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it does look and play so much better than N64, and this is a graphics card from, I guess, 96-ish, I think it was. So same year as the N64, roughly. And yeah,
Running quite a bit better.
it's a lot better. Although, to be fair, when you put them side by side, I do actually think that the N64 version looks visually nicer somehow. Like, the colors and shading are a little different, but obviously it plays much, much, much better on PC.
This is the first time I ever beat the game was years later on PC using that version of the game. And that same Glide emulator I talked about in the Turok Dinosaur Hunter DF Retro. And you can also unlock the frame rate in Turok 2, which is really, really good because it has almost no problems in that version of the game. The only thing is I think swimming speed is slightly affected, but that's all I really remember. But you could also edit the FOV. There's so many things. It just played so much better. And I did beat it, even a bit reluctantly, though, at the end after I kind of kept getting lost on the last level.
So that version is the first version that I played all the way through as well. And that's the version that I actually owned back in the day. So we're playing my original version here, just like with Turok 1. And beyond everything that you said improvement-wise, like the thing that really strikes me is the mouse aiming is so much better.
Oh, gosh.
I feel like Turok 1's mouse emulation, or the way they handle the mouse mapped to the thumbstick, I guess you could say, it doesn't really work well, but it does feel quite natural in Turok 2. So it feels like a proper PC conversion that really takes advantage of the hardware, and I do feel it's an improvement over N64 overall. But I think, so years later, years pass, we're still talking about Turok. I think the first time we ever met, we were probably talking about Turok.
We were talking about Turok.
But Night Dive and all those wonderful people over there did remaster this game along with Turok 1. But unlike Turok 1, they implemented some serious changes, and not just to the visuals, but the game itself is significantly better.
Yeah, one of the core things they did was simplified map design. And I don't mean making it dumber, but I mean making it actually sensible and recognizable. That one section in Cave of the Blind Ones or Lair of the Blind Ones that I'm talking about, the underwater cave, it is so much more navigable now. And, just the readily usable map you can take advantage of. The fact that you have an FOV and a frame rate now, which is unlocked up to 60, which makes the game so much more fluid and enjoyable to play. I just really prefer this version. And the PC version at the time of release had all these awesome graphical options on top.
Yeah.
Like SSAO, per object motion blur in a game like this, by the way, looks awesome.
Because it really does. That was a new feature, too, that was not in the Turok 1 port.
Yeah, not at all. And it kind of makes the character models, when they're moving around you and doing their death animations, makes them almost look like claymation. It's a really cool look.
Yeah, it's
and,
great.
Just lots of post-processing options and all the things you could ever wish for. It's an amazing version of the game, and it made it shine through, but at the same time, I still think Turok 2 has limitations in game design which come through in the end.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on there. But, it first on PC, excellent version. Then it got a release on Xbox One. And again, maybe we'll go into this in more detail in the future. But that version is 1080p, does not support Xbox One X. And it runs extremely well with many of the PC visual features, but not all. And it's a really good version. But what I want to talk about now is basically Switch version. The Turok 2 is on the Switch. It just came out a week or so ago. I think it's really cool having this game on a portable system. It's great for pick up and play. Put it to sleep, pick it up and go. Mm-hmm. But it's a really interesting conversion. And I spoke with some of the guys that had worked on this game after, the Turok 1 video and everything. And it turns out that this port was not the simplest thing.
Is there any reason why for that? Like, what do you mean? Is it running well, I hope?
So, okay. So first of all, yes, they continue to target 60 frames per second, and it gets there most of the time, but you definitely have plenty of little dips and hitches and skips along the way. But what's interesting about this version is that they backported the Vulkan render that they had created later to Turok 2. So the initial attempt was to actually convert this to the latest unified version of the Kex engine, but it wasn't really possible within the time available. So they backported this, right? And they said that it's like Vulkan runs dramatically better than the OpenGL version, and it wasn't even clear if it's just slower or if GL is just being used inefficiently on the Switch. But either way, this is Vulkan based, and it does run mostly at 60 FPS. But there is a weird hurdle with the resolution. So I think I mentioned this to you before.
Yeah. Basically, as you told me, it's running at 720p at all times, regardless of docked, portable, and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. So, and this might change in the future, possibly. We'll see. I don't know. Maybe they can do a patch. But basically, there's some sort of legacy issue. There's like a buffer hanging there somewhere that sort of makes it so that when you try to transition between docked and portable mode, it doesn't work properly. So for the time being, it basically needs to be locked to 720p across all modes, which is, it's not the end of the world, but Turok 1 was 1080p and docked, so hopefully that can be fixed. And they also had to reduce some things like the explosions are slightly simplified. They had to tone down some of the debris, as that was just absolutely tanking the frame rate, mostly because of the CPU.
Oh wow!
So,
like spawning in new particles or draw calls for them and things like that. Wow.
Exactly. So, and then, there was just a few other things along the way that didn't work quite right out of the gate that they had to tweak and mess with, and it's really interesting hearing about what it takes, because you think like, okay, porting a game like Turok 2 to something like the Switch, easy as pie. Really, it's quite a task. I mean, the Kex engine, and one of its strengths, I feel, is that they sort of embrace the way the old games work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but with that comes some of the drawbacks. So there are some issues you face there. And from what I understand, the original source code for Turok 2, and at least whichever version was being ported over and worked with, not the cleanest thing in the world. It actually kind of makes me wonder, like, when you think about it, it's like, I can't believe this even worked at all on the N64. So
I still have, it kind of almost didn't at the end of the day. It's basically not running. But yeah, it sounds like it sounds like something I would actually want to play, even if it is, missing some of the like post-processing options on the PC version.
Yeah.
Honestly, that you don't need that for your core Turok experience.
Exactly. So they still do have some of the more advanced visual features, just at least a couple. So you do get shadow maps, which adds tremendously to the depth of the level, I feel, since there's a lot of big flat open areas. So just having shadows, I feel, like kind of gives the world a little bit more depth visually. And there's a few other things like some saturation options, and you can mess with the way the decals, and you can of course increase the FOV. So overall, it looks good. It looks like Turok 2 but enhanced. It doesn't have all the features of the other version, but it looks good enough. And honestly, playing it in portable mode on that portable screen, it looks really, really sharp and clean. And they even added gyro aiming. So it's kind of like a subtle thing, right? So you use the right stick for normal aiming, but if you just sort of tilt the system or your controller a little bit, you kind of can dial it in. So getting headshots works really well with this
very
version.
Useful. This game has like sniping in it, which is very different than Turok 1, which basically did not.
Exactly. So it's one of those things where I do feel like overall it's generally a strong port, but it's kind of interesting to hear how the Switch created some issues and some bottlenecks in bringing it over. Just it wasn't well suited to certain types of tasks necessarily. But still, overall, it's 60 frames per second Turok 2 on the go. I think Joshua Fireseed would be happy about that.
I hope he pops up in your video right now giving a thumbs up or something like that. I definitely use Joshua Fireseed in my videos all the time. Great character, just kind of stuck in a game that I have such conflicted emotions about. I love Turok 1, but Turok 2 is just, it's not good enough to have the name Turok.
Sadly,
at times.
it's one of those series that did kind of take a downward dive, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
I think the original is brilliant. Turok 2 is flawed but good. But after that, the series really kind of lost me in a big way. I mean, Turok 3 tries to be Half-Life so bad, and it just doesn't pull it off.
And, oh gosh, I can't even remember
Turok Evolution.
Evolution. Oh, yeah, that one's early 2000s shooter design in a bag.
Yeah, so it is kind of that 2000s era design a little bit. Like, it feels sort of like a poor man's attempt at Halo, I suppose, in some ways. But really, the game just misses everything about what made Turok good in the first place. So the large, expansive levels, they're gone. The quality animation work, completely gone. Like, everything just feels terrible. It really doesn't feel at all like Turok. I mean, most levels are just these, like, almost like small rooms, if you will. Like, in this first area, you just step out here into the field, you know, you have to shoot one guy, get this item, and then the door opens, and then as soon as you go through the door, well, it just loads. And there are so many loading screens in this game. They just happen like around every corner. So each little section is just this tiny little area where you run around a little bit, shoot a few guys, and then you get another loading screen. So all of the exploration of Turok is completely gone here. It's just a straightforward linear shooter, but it doesn't even do it that well. I mean, you know, you look at Halo, that was still pretty seamless, where this is just section after section. And they even have these flight sequences as well, which try to riff on Panzer Dragoon a little bit, maybe. But those are also broken up into these level chunks, and the actual mechanics are really poor. So, I mean, for me, this is one of those games where, I mean, I was happy to see Turok return at the time, but then you get your hands on this, and it's really, really, really bad. Honestly, one of the worst shooters of that generation, I think, though there were a lot of really bad games at the time as well, but still. And then there was the completely separate 2008 reboot, which was okay. It's its own thing.
With Ron Perlman, I remember that.
Yeah, but it's much more of a 2008 era, gritty, linear, cinematic shooter, so it's not the Turok we know and love. So Turok 2 was kind of like the last enjoyable Turok game for me, even if it's flawed. So
I'd agree.
I've had a lot of fun revisiting it again on the Switch here.
Yeah.
And for this video, actually capturing it on other platforms as well, including the Voodoo PC, which that actually was interesting, because that version, another thing I had forgotten about, the remaster version lets you choose again between N64 and PC soundtrack.
Oh, nice.
When they brought it over to PC, they used Redbook audio. And yeah, sure enough, you know, pop that into the old PC and Redbook audio tracks, baby. It sounds, it's pretty good. So it's neat to have both versions of that. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of a brief summary, I guess you could say. This is one of those games where maybe down the line I would like to cover this and maybe also examine Turok 3 just to kind of understand it better in a full DF retro. But for now, you know, hopefully you kind of see where we stand on Turok 2. It's a game that brings some of us together, at least.
Yeah. I one controversial opinion before I go. Everyone loves the cerebral bore. I get it. It's super visceral, it does damage, and it has this amazing sound. But it's so useless as a weapon. Believe me.
Believe me. I'm with you. It's just a memorable concept.
Exactly.
But I think that's going to do it for this one. So thanks for joining me on this weird little journey through history, Alex.
Of course, John. I'm always up for talking Turok.
Most excellent. And, of course, if you guys watching the video enjoyed this one, be sure to let us know. That means liking, subscribing, ringing the notification bell, and even, perhaps, following us over on Twitter, because we are always ready to talk about Turok. Except for Turok Evolution. Well, maybe not.
Maybe never.
But either way, that's all from us, so thanks for watching.